Okay, I'm going to let everyone in now.
Excellent. Let me know when we're ready to go, Yulia.
Yep, we are good. I'm admitting now.
Welcome, everyone. My name's Morwenna. We're just welcoming everyone into the space, and we will kick off shortly. So settle in. So lovely to have you all with us this afternoon. Thank you for being here. Thank you for giving us some of your Monday, some of your first part of December. We are finally here, aren't we? Was just chatting to my colleagues saying my advent calendar in our house was up this morning, and it's definitely feeling like that end of the year now. All right, so it's just past 12, so I think we might begin. So, welcome to our final of four training capacity building workshops that we've been running as part of our project Building an Artistically Inclusive Future, which is a project funded by Arts Tasmania and has been all about upskilling artists and arts workers across the island to embed access and inclusion into all of our work. My name's Morwenna and I'm an access consultant. I run a consultancy practice specialising in access, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's been a real pleasure to work with Arts Tasmania on this project. And today's topic, a really important topic, is around working with artists with disability. So, artists are, of course, really at the core of what we all do, working in the arts and culture space, and really excited to be joined by some fabulous disabled artists this afternoon to get into a real conversation about how we can best work with and support artists with disability in our practice. So, of course, before we begin, would like to take a moment to ground us in an acknowledgement of country. I've got my feet firmly planted on the ground and taking a moment to feel incredibly grateful for the country that I'm joining from today, beautiful Gadigal country, which is where I live and do a lot of my work. I'm based in Sydney and thinking of you all in Lituita and extending my respects to elders past and present across your incredible part of this country as well. And really acknowledging, of course, that we live in a place where sovereignty has never been ceded, and also that as part of any First Nations conversations that we have in arts and culture, it's really important to consider access and inclusion as part of that. We know that a much higher proportion of First Nations Australians live with disability than non-First Nations Australians. So, having access and inclusion as an important part of our First Nations work is really critical and vital as well. So, a little bit of housekeeping before our webinar today. So we are in webinar format and we are recording today's session. So you won't be able to, unfortunately, chat to me using your microphone, but do encourage you to use the chat and we'll keep our eye on any comments or questions coming through the chat and try and respond to those as we go. We'll also have a Q&A with our artists after their discussion as well. So encourage you to think of any questions that you might have for our artists, and we'll invite and create some space for you to ask some questions via the chat to our incredible panel that we've got joining us this afternoon as well. We have captions available today, so if you're wanting to access those, you can hit the CC button, which should be on the bottom right of your screen. And really encourage you to do whatever you need to do to get the most out of today's session. If you need to stretch, grab a cup of tea, step away for a bit. You do you, and whatever you need is very a-okay with us. So, for those that haven't met me before, I have a background as a musician, and disability became part of my life about 25 years ago or so. So I've been working in the arts and culture sector for a long time now. And I'm really interested in how we can best support disabled artists who have not only a voice at the table, but to be able to produce their best work in our sector. So I am someone for whom, I guess disability changed the course of my career as an artist. For me, that moved me more into the arts administration side of things. And it's really interesting now, as a parent of a young neurodivergent person, really looking at what access in the arts is going to be like for him as he grows up. We've already experienced some discrimination, essentially, of not being able to access the arts in terms of certain programs here. So I'm really curious about how we can open up arts and culture to make sure that it's a space where everyone really does belong and feels welcome. As I said, I'm based in Sydney, but I've got a really strong and beautiful connection with Tasmania. Tasmania is where I did my first ever internship as an arts administrator with the TSO many years ago. And over the last 6, 7 years, I've been doing quite a bit of work with different organisations across the state. For example, Mona and Dark Mofo, working with Festivale at the moment on their upcoming event in January next year. Have worked with the TSO, the Unconformity, and many others. So very familiar with the great artistic content that is coming from Tasmania and punching above its weight, I believe. So today we're going to be hearing from some incredible artists with disability and people working in the access and inclusion space in the arts. So we have Elise and Kelly joining us from Second Echo. We have Lisa Rime and we have Zara Sully from Sawtooth Ari in Launceston. And I'll introduce them to you a little bit further in a bit. But how we're going to run today's session is I'm going to start with a bit of a presentation about some initial thoughts and concepts about how I think we can work best with disabled artists, and then we'll move into we'll take a short break and then move into a panel discussion, really hearing from the artists about what works well for them. So just to give you a little overview of this project that this training session is a part of today. So it's called Building an Artistically Inclusive Tasmania, and it's been an incredible partnership, a sort of 12-month long partnership with Arts Tasmania, and it has been all around supporting artists and arts organisations to embed access and inclusion into their work, with a real focus on practical tools, resources and collaborations. And we've done this through this series of training sessions that we've run. And if you've missed any, they're all available on the Arts Tasmania website, so you can always go back and tune in to any that you haven't been able to join us for. We've had sessions on neurodivergence in the workplace, disability inclusion training, and accessible marketing communications training as well. We also now have a fantastic resource hub on the Arts Tasmania website of lots of different useful links and checklists to help you embed access and inclusion into your work. And very excitingly, we'll be running a forum, an arts industry forum focused on access and inclusion on the 5th of February next year. That's called From Barriers to Belonging. And it'll be happening at the Hedberg in Hobart. And I'll get my colleagues to pop a little link to the chat for how you can register for that. Registrations have just opened, and there is a limited number of spaces available for people joining in person. It is also available via live stream. So would love to see you there and encourage you to register now if you can. So, sort of talked a little bit, I think, about our agenda for today already, and do encourage you to use the chat. I'm sorry that just due to numbers of how many people are on the call, we will be communicating, we're getting you to communicate with us via the chat. So don't be shy, do feel free to use the chat and we'll answer and respond to your questions as we go. Okay, so I'm going to jump in now to some really practical tips, I hope, around how we can best work with artists with disability. As I said, this is an area that I've been working in now for probably the last 15 years or so. So I guess part of my journey into becoming an access consultant was that really I just fell in love with the work of deaf and disabled artists. I think deaf and disabled artists are making some of the most exciting work on the planet. Artists with disability are natural risk takers, innovators, experimenters, creative problem solvers. And I think that really shines and shows through the incredible artistic content that so many disabled artists are making across Australia and internationally. So that's really part of what's driven me to do the sort of work that I do now. So, I think first up, some really basic kind of key considerations about working with artists with disability. Step one, I think, really is to think about the type of space that you're operating in and wanting to create something that feels really welcoming, inclusive, and accessible. And something that we're going to talk a little bit about today is making sure that we check in with people on what their access needs are and be ready to make any sort of adjustments that might be required to enable artists with disability to do their best work. And so that might be things that are physical about the environment that you're in. It might be things to do with sensory considerations. It might even be things to do with time. And so often in the arts, we tend to do things really quickly. We have these intensive rehearsal or creative development periods, and often we're sort of working, for short, sharp bursts of really, long hours and intensive kind of work periods. And for lots of people with disability, that isn't kind of conducive to our access needs and doesn't always enable us to do our best work. So really asking and taking the time to get to know someone that you're going to be working with and their access needs is really important to them being able to thrive and succeed. And then I think, particularly if you're in an organisation, it's around looking for opportunities to build your team's confidence, to be able to have some of these conversations about disability. I know kind of historically, sometimes some people have avoided wanting to talk about disability. And I think often that's not super helpful because it's something that I think more and more of us do want to talk about because we want to be able to articulate what our access needs are. And so getting really sort of comfortable and confident talking about disability access is an important kind of first step to all of this. So, access requirements. Hopefully, this is a phrase that you've heard before, but if not, welcome. And access needs, access requirements is something that we want all of us to be talking about a lot more. And so, what's interesting about talking about access needs is that sometimes you might need to ask someone a couple of times before they feel comfortable enough or they trust you enough that you've created enough safety for someone to really honestly be able to tell you what it is that they need. And using really open language is helpful. So, do you have any access needs? What do you need to be able to take part fully or to do your best work? And as a disabled person, it's so much easier to answer that question when someone asks you, rather than perhaps being an independent artist going, oh, there's something that I need, but I don't know if this new organisation I might be collaborating with is really going to be up for this conversation. I don't know if they're safe, if they're going to support my access needs. So using that really open-ended question for you as an organisation is really, really helpful and much easier for an individual to respond to when asked. Now, another really important point here, I think, is to ask everyone. We never want to assume who may or may not have access needs. 80 to 90% of disability is non-visible. It's things that we can't see. So it's just a good reminder to never assume who may or may not have needs, and to make sure that as part of your systems and processes, talking about access needs is something that you're asking absolutely everyone that you're working with. And as I said, asking at different stages in your relationship can be really helpful. If someone's applying for a job with you, for example, having some good inclusive wording on your job ad about you being open to providing access is really helpful. Asking again before someone comes in for an interview, asking again before someone starts working with you. Because it is about trust and safety, people sharing that information with you. So it might take a couple of goes for people to really, honestly tell you what they need. And also, even as part of working in an organisation, if that's where you're based, asking about access needs on a regular basis is really helpful, because I know I used to work at the Australia Council for a very long time, nearly 10 years. And when someone works in a place for a long time, they might develop disability or different access needs over time. So I think asking about access needs as part of your annual review or annual performance conversation process can be really helpful, just to make sure that you're checking in about that on a regular basis. And of course, a key consideration with any information about access needs is privacy. So making sure that you have consent to share access need information if you need to share that information, and getting permission from the person as to how and who you share that information with is really important as well. Now, I guess moving into more of a workplace sort of conversation, that word access requirements or access needs in a workplace is sometimes also called reasonable adjustments. And that might be a term that you perhaps have come across in the past as well. And reasonable adjustments are a very similar thing, but usually in a kind of workplace context. And there's lots of different types of reasonable adjustments that people might request. It might be about things like flexible working hours or having a quiet space available to use. It might be about having extra time or getting instructions communicated to you in a particular way. It might be having sign language interpretation or particular assistive technology, all things that allow you to do your job and meet your access needs. So I think the thing about reasonable adjustments in a workplace is that it is a conversation, and it should be a dialogue between the employee or the staff member or the contractor and the workplace, and coming up with a solution around reasonable adjustments together. Making sure that you capture what's agreed and that you document that, and also that you're doing that kind of regular review together as well. Now, if you are looking for any more information about reasonable adjustments, highly recommend the Creative Workplaces website. So they're a new arm of Creative Australia, and they've got some fantastic information about reasonable adjustments on their website, which has been really, really helpful to have out in the world. Now, language. I wanted to touch on this very briefly because I think it is an important part of the conversation about access needs and about how we work with artists with disability. Also about things like how you might communicate or promote or market work by artists with disability if you have it in your program for your festival, or if you're spotlighting or profiling a certain artist. So obviously, every person with disability will have a different relationship to that word, and they'll have different language that they like to use. So, asking people what their preferences are, of course, is really helpful. And if you are doing some marketing and promotional work and working with artists with disability, it's always good to check in with that content around the words that you're going to be using, to make sure that they're words that are meaningful and not harmful to them. So there's two main language styles around disability in use across Australia at the moment. I'm using both quite interchangeably today. So they are person first language, which is where we say person with disability. And then we also have identity first language, where we say disabled person. So it's a really personal preference on what terminology that people use. I myself am a proud disabled woman. That's a really important part of my identity and a really important part of what makes Morwenna Morwenna. I wouldn't be Morwenna without my disability. So, but for other people, they will have different preferences. So, understanding that, and if you do need to refer to that in some way, just asking people what language that they use if you need to use it. So, I think it would be useful just to talk as we move into this conversation about supporting artists with disability. Important to kind of identify what our responsibilities really are here. So we do have some laws around disability in Australia. At a national level, we have our Disability Discrimination Act, which talks about a range of things to do with potential discrimination for people with disability. You also have a new piece of legislation based in Tasmania specifically that was released in July this year as well. So it's worth being across and being aware of your responsibilities under the law. And I think, as I said, often it is a two-way street with access needs and best support for artists. So artists do need to be able to tell you what they need, and that's obviously the artist is the person that's going to know their needs best. So being able to support them, to be able to communicate those access needs to you as a collaborator or organisation that might be working with them, that's really important. And all of us, there is a kind of legal requirement around providing access and making adjustments. So that is the law here in Australia and really worth being across. So a couple of things to mention, and this might be about recruitment. If you're recruiting new staff members, it might be about open call out for artists that you might be working with. It might be about an EOI for a new program that you might be delivering. But some things that I think can be really helpful to do here and consider are around things like using plain language. So easy to understand language. There is a fantastic tool called the Hemingway editor, and you can put any text into that website, and it will give you the reading level of the text that you've provided. And I've used it quite a few times, and it's always eye-opening. I often might think that I've written something really, really clearly and succinctly and plainly, and I'll pop it into Hemingway, and it'll tell me, you've written something at at the level of someone that goes to university. For something to be deemed plain English, which I'm sure is a term that many of us have heard often, that's the reading level of a 12-year-old generally. So I think that's helpful to have in our minds. Also, providing information, whether it's job ads or EOIs in alternative formats, can be really helpful. So that might be easy read format, might be audio, large print. Often in the arts, we do so much in PDF documents. And unless a PDF document has been specifically designed to be something called an interactive accessible PDF, it won't be able to be read by a screen reader. So that's why it can be really helpful to have an alternative version of that document as well, whether it's a job ad or whatever it might be. So an alternative version might be a plain language Word document. It might be having some HTML as a different format that's able to be read by someone who uses a screen reader. Having some flexibility, I think, around recruiting, whether that's recruiting artists or staff members. So that might be about flexibility with deadlines. It might be about some extra time in an interview process or information in different formats. but time and flexibility really important as well. And I think in terms of planning, again, whether you're from an organisation or you're planning, you might be an individual planning a particular artistic project, building in access costs into budgets from the start is really, really important. And case in point, I'm organising this forum for part of this Arts Tasmania project for next year. We've budgeted to have an Auslan interpretation service for that event. I don't yet know if any deaf people will be attending and whether Auslan will be required, but by building that into the budget from the beginning, that means hopefully there won't be too many surprises and that we'll be prepared and ready to provide any sort of access requirements that we might need to meet to enable disabled artists and others to participate in that event. So the next thing that I wanted to touch on are access riders. Now, I'm sure most of you will have heard the term rider before. For many of us, that might make us think about things like Eddie Van Halen and his rider that talked about, no brown M&Ms in the dressing room. So an access rider is something that we're seeing more and more disabled artists and arts workers provide. So it's a rider specifically to do with access needs. So I think this is really exciting because it gives people finally a way to document and put forward what it is that they might need to participate in a workplace or a particular artistic project or an event. So there are a few different access rider templates available out there in the world. And I know that Performing Lines, as an example, is doing some really great work around access riders at the moment. I really love this template from Unlimited, which is a UK commissions program in the UK. And this is, where is their template? Their template is here. So it talks about what is an access rider, how do I use one, and then it gives some examples of different types of templates. And they can all look and feel different depending on the individual and what it is that they need to communicate. But I think sometimes it is really helpful to have a template to work from, and it gives you kind of a nice starting base to work from as well. So that can be really, really helpful. And so again, as part of your conversation with any artists that you might be working with, as part of that conversation about access needs, you might make it clear that you welcome anyone to give you an access rider if that's something that people have. And that can just be part of a similar process with any other rider sort of requirements that people might have as well. So I think access riders are a great thing, and again, something that we're starting to see a lot more now across the industry, and a lot more artists are starting to use. So what an access rider typically might include might be a couple of sentences about the artist, first of all, and then it will really dig into articulating what their access needs might be. So it might be things around communication preferences, or particular days that they might be, particular things they might need to work in an office environment, what they might need around travel, what they might need to be able to participate in an event or run a workshop. Often they might also include emergency information, and sometimes they might also provide a range of different supporting documentational links to help the person they're providing the access rider to kind of get up to speed with any particular requirements around their type of access that they might have. So yes, have a look at that template, and highly recommend making that part of your process around any work that you're doing with artists, and welcoming access riders for anyone who might want to provide them. So the next thing I wanted to talk about before we move into our panel discussion is wanting to talk about the fact that access, yes, there's a lot of requirements and responsibilities, as I've just talked about, but actually access can be this incredible creative tool that I think can make artistic content a lot better. when we embed it in and build artistic work that is going to work for everyone. So there's this concept called creative access, and sometimes it's also called embedded access or aesthetic access as well. And what it is it's about building in the access right from the beginning of a creative work. So from the point of creative development or planning, it's not the usual thing that we do, which is book the Auslan interpreter to show up for the Wednesday night performance, but it's about having the Auslan interpreter right there and building them in potentially as a character or having a role in that creative development process as well. And there's a fantastic company in the UK called Grey Eye Theatre, and their artistic director, Jenny Seeley, who's amazing, says that this idea of creative access is about the ways in which accessibility concerns are not simply last-minute add-ons, but actually influence and shape the work in wonderful, unexpected ways. And I think that's really beautiful in terms of seeing access as something that's this amazing creative tool that we all have at our disposal and that we can build into, make and create work that is exceptional. So was just going to show you a couple of different examples of what this potentially can look like in practice. So I'll just play you this short example from a beautiful work that's had a long life now, actually. It's called You Know We Belong Together. It's based on Home and Away, and it's by an incredible WA disabled artist called Julia Hales in collaboration with Black Swan Theatre. And they built in their Auslan interpreters as characters in the show, and they are moving around the set and interacting with performers in different ways. So here's a short little snippet of this just to have a look. That was a fantastic work from a couple of years ago. And the next work that I wanted to share with you is by Windmill Theatre Company, so based in South Australia. This was a work for children called Creation from a number of years ago. And what I thought was interesting around this one is that they actually pre-recorded their Auslan and they screened it within the set for all of their shows. So that was really great for touring because it meant they had the access available wherever they went. And because they'd kind of built in that access, deaf people could come to any show, not just the one show in the run that might be the Auslan interpreted show. So we'll just have a little look now at, at creation.
How did the world begin?
What's inside black holes? Can anyone lick their own elbow?
What is the purpose of life?
What big mystery would you like an answer to?
So another really great example there. And what I really like about that one is that it's work for children and that they've embedded access into that, because we know sadly that often children with disability miss out on having access to great artistic content. The next example, I might not show you the video of this one, but this was a really kind of landmark example of creative access from the UK. It's a work that's 11 years old now, and it's called Wendy Hoose, and it's by a Scottish theatre company called Birds of Paradise. And what was so interesting about this particular example is that it's a sex comedy. It's about a kind of hookup situation. It's all shown in a bedroom. And they've had a really kind of playful approach to how they've embedded the access with this show. What they've done is they had a TV set in the bedroom as part of the set, and the TV had the British Sign Language interpretation on the TV screen at all times. A lot of the dialogue in the show was through text message because of this kind of hookup situation. And so they did all of the captions as little text message bubbles on the back of the wall for everyone to be able to read and see the captions that way. And for the audio description, they actually had the audio describer as a particular character in the show, and she audio described everything that was happening visually on the stage over the main speakers so everyone could hear the audio description. And her character was to be a very prudish audio describer, describing the action that was taking place on stage. So it was very funny and playful and joyful, and the access kind of really helped with the storytelling elements of that work. So I think that was a terrific example as well. And that's something, a particular work that really set the bar for what creative access can look and feel like. The final thing that I wanted to touch on here was around something called shadow interpreting. So for anyone who might not have heard this term before, shadow interpreting is something that we see in Australia with Auslan. Now, traditionally, when we go to a show that has Auslan interpretation, the action is happening here on the stage, and then the Auslan interpreters are over here on the side of the stage. So as a deaf person, sometimes you have to make a decision. Am I going to watch the action happening on the stage, or am I going to watch over here so that I get the access that I need to that production? So what shadow interpreting does is it has the Auslan interpreter follow the characters around the stage, so that as a deaf person, you have in one line of sight the action happening in the play or whatever it might be, and the access kind of with that in one sight line. So I think that's really, really exciting to see. And we're seeing more companies do this as well. And I'm just going to play you a short video from Opera Australia because they've been committed to doing this for about the last decade or so, and again doing it a lot for their work for children, which I think is really exciting. So I'll just leave that there, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of what shadow interpreting is. And I think that is an example of how creative access can be really embedded into a production, so that access is there for every performance, rather than just, the accessible performance. So thank you for listening to the mini Morwenna lecture today, and hopefully that started to put some thoughts in place around working with disabled artists and working to support access across our work in arts and culture. What we're going to do now is we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to come back and we'll get into our panel discussion this afternoon. So We are going to kick off again at 12:50 Australian Eastern Standard Time. So that's in 9 minutes from now. And we will see you all back here very shortly to get into our panel discussion. Thanks, everyone. Welcome. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a nice break. We're going to remake a start and get into our panel conversation of today's session. But before we do, we're very lucky to have with us Elise and Kelly from Second Echo, and I'll invite them to turn their cameras on now if they can. And we've got a real treat in store today because Elise is going to run us through a guided meditation with soundscape, which I tell you what, I feel like this week I really need. I should have said at the beginning of the session too that this week is, of course, the week of International Day for People with Disability, which is happening on Wednesday, which is a really wonderful moment in our community to acknowledge and celebrate the achievements of people with disability. But ironically, it is often a really inaccessible week because a lot of us have to do many, many things within the kind of fortnight surrounding that day. So I think having some grounding in a meditation will be really beautiful right now. So I'm going to just make sure that everyone has what they need. Kelly and Elise, are you guys ready to go? I'm getting a nod.
Can you hear me, Morwenna?
Yes, we can hear you, Elise, and Kelly, I think I can hear you as well. So
Great.
over
I'll
to you
start
guys.
the music for you, Elise.
Thank you. I can hear you, Kelly. Stars are bright in the night sky, fading in and out far away. Do you want to be an astronaut? When the moon moves up like a balloon passes by in the clouds, can you imagine to be a star? Is a dream or a message? Occasionally, asteroids can explode. The universe can expand and wider. Do you like time travel in space? Wow, that could be interesting. I think that is confined and safe, like a home being free and independent. History. It's wonder. The space is alive. Today.
Thank you so much, Elise, and thank you, Kelly, for providing our beautiful soundscape as well. What a great way to kick off our second part of our conversation today. Elise, is that meditation something that you've done before? Do you want to tell us a little bit about where it came from?
It's come from my project with the Stars Remember.
Amazing.
And it's improvised.
Improvised. Wow. Wow. It's very beautiful and felt very calming. That's what I needed right now. So thank you. I'm now going to invite onto the screen our panel. So hello, Zara, and hello, Kelly, and hello, Lisa. What a great team of fabulous people that we have for our conversation this afternoon. So what we might do to begin, if that's okay, is get you all just to introduce yourself briefly, your name, what you do, and maybe a little bit about why you do it. So Elise, I might put you up first if that's okay.
My name is Elise Romaszko. I'm from Second Echo Ensemble. And what I do as an artist is I'm a poet and performer and a director.
That sounds like a triple threat to me, Elise. Amazing. And thank you so much for sharing some of your incredible poetry with us today. And
Thank you.
I know we're very lucky to have Second Echo also sharing some performance at our forum coming up next year as well. So great to have you with us, Elise. I'm going to throw to Kelly now, who's also from Second Echo.
Thanks, Morwenna. Yes, I guess my first language is dance. I started moving before anything else. And I think that's really how I still understand the world. And what gets me out of bed in the morning is that wondering of what moves us as people, what moves us emotionally, physically, what calls us to action. And I've had the privilege of working with Second Echo. Oh, Elise, when since about 2013, I think, I collided with this incredible ensemble, and now have the absolute privilege of working alongside and scaffolding and butt kicking, I think, some of the most incredible artists that we've got on the island right now. And it's great to be here to celebrate some of that diversity today. Thanks.
Thanks, Kelly. And for anyone who might not be familiar with Second Echo's work, Kelly, do you want to tell us a little bit about what Second Echo does and how long it's been around for?
Absolutely, yes. We are this year celebrating the 20th anniversary of the ensemble, and it was originally founded with creative director, or artistic director at that time, Finnegan Krakameyer, an extraordinary writer who moved back to South Australia, and that's when I met the company. It started out very much as a performance-driven theatre, and then moving into dance, and over the last, I would say, probably 6 or 7 years, really is kind of shifting on its axis to be artist led. And that means that the arts have grown, and now we are definitely a multi-arts organization supporting artists with whichever art form seems the best to tell the story that they feel like telling. And I think what's really important about the work the ensemble is kind of driving at the moment is that work is not about having a disability. It's not about only having the challenges or the barriers. It's about storytelling, and it's really showcasing the diversity of stories that are quite often silenced or invisible, and that deserve to be heard and seen. So we work with basically the doors are open for anyone in Second Echo, and it's an integrated ensemble of artists who identify with disability and who don't, or who find their courage or the safety to identify once they're already working with us. Of challenges or disabilities that they are working with and who are part of who they are. So it's a really exciting place to be. And we're a little tired by this point of the year. I'm beaming in from Nashville on my way to New York to do for International Day of Persons with Disability at the United Nations. But no, it's an extraordinary company. I'll put the web address in the chat if people are unfamiliar.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you for beaming in while you're on the road as well. We really appreciate having you as part of today's chat. Zara, hello. So nice to have you with us, representing from up North Tasmania.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name's Zara. I'm the director of Sawtooth ARI, which means ARI stands for Artist Run Initiative. So effectively, we're an art gallery run for artists by artists. And aside from my day job at the gallery, I'm also a visual artist, curator, writer, researcher, a bag of tricks, as we like to say sometimes. And yeah.
It's so good to have you, Zara, and I was lucky enough to get to come and visit you in person earlier in the year, and I was really struck with just how much you've been able to do in a small space, and also how creatively you were thinking about using like many arts orgs, you've got a tiny budget, but you've got a tiny budget for access, but how you were thinking really carefully about how to use that tiny budget for access and actually how far it can go too when you kind of, figure it all out. So yeah, it was lovely to get to see you in your space. Hello, Lisa. Welcome. So nice to see you too.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. I always find it really hard to describe what I do because I've not been able to be as focused as many people would like, perhaps because I've got ADHD. But I guess when I went to art school, I majored in painting. I've exhibited as a life drawing artist and as a sculptor. As well as a painter. I've played for years in bands and had some experience touring and recording as well as gigging. I love improv. I've done a bit of event management. I've done a bit of modeling. I've sung in choirs all my life. I've experienced as a commercial artist, both with sculpture and illustration. I like designing and making clothes and furniture, both personally and professionally. I enjoy doing event dressing. I've done a bit of professional event dressing, and these days I also provide quiet/sensory spaces. My disabilities, there are a long list of chronic illnesses that I have. Most of them are physical based. Like many people with chronic illnesses and disabilities, I also have trauma and PTSD, and yes, I have ADHD diagnosis now and probably also have autism, but can't afford to get a diagnosis yet. What I'm really interested in is community. And so it's a real privilege to be able to be here because I see a lot of people in my community who are missing out on opportunities, and I can empathize with some aspects of why it's difficult. It can be really difficult as an artist to show up. So yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Oh, we're thrilled to have you, Lisa, and really excited to hear that you're doing so many different things. But my ears pricked up to hear you're now doing some work around sensory spaces because I think that's really important. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, just for anyone who might not have come across a sensory space before?
Oh, they're super fun. I was going to talk a little bit about this later, but I guess so if you're in a band, for example, you might have a green room that you can go to. If you're a performer in the theatre, you may have a similar sort of room, a dressing room. But not every artist has that, and not every visitor has that. But to provide that means people have a space to step out of the whatever may be hectic. It could be a really loud gig where offering a quiet space or a sensory space allows people to move in and out according to capacity. If they're feeling a little overwhelmed, if they would just like some time by themselves, if they'd like to ground themselves, if they'd like to have a quiet conversation. I set up my sensory spaces with gentle lighting, different areas so people can be together or alone. I like to make cubbies so people can hide, soft weighted plushies, blankets, heated throws, things that are comforting, because I think we can all relate to comfort being something that allows us to participate.
Amazing. And my bad, I should be saying your last names. I'm going to put them all in the chat. But Lisa Rime, and we've got Elise Romaszko, Kelly Drummond-Cawthorn, and Zara Sully. So yes. And if I know Second Echo's put some links in the chat, Zara and Lisa, if you've got any links you want to pop into the chat, feel free so people can find you after the session. It would be very welcome. Great. Well, let's get into our discussion, and I'll ask you some questions, and then audience members, don't forget to start thinking of some questions as well, and feel free to pop those in the chat as you think of them. But I think we might start with our Second Echo guys, and maybe with you, Elise. You've been part of Second Echo now for such a long time, and I know that you're also doing lots of other roles now and really stepping into leadership and directing and those sorts of things. And I was wondering, how can disabled artists take the lead and have a real say in creative decisions?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think that would be Kelly, because she helps me a lot in terms with being on meetings that I don't know about. And she helped me understand all the jargon that I don't understand. So easy English for me to understand more about meetings like this, for example.
And we do use so much jargon in the arts, don't we? A lot of the time. Yep, I'm certainly guilty of that so often. And so, Elise, for you, is it about having sort of people like Kelly to be able to provide some of that support to help demystify some of those things?
Yes, I'm on, as you know, Morwenna, I'm on different, lots of mini meetings
Yes.
to represent second echo. So to have her on board, it helps me a lot, especially with a disability, it makes things hard.
Yeah, it's so important, isn't it, to have
And
support.
having Kelly as my support, I do enjoy having her.
You've still got the job, I think, Kelly. Yep. And Elise, you are a very busy and important person. We know that
Yes.
you're our Tasmanian representative on the implementation advisory group for the National Equity Plan, which is really exciting. For anyone who hasn't come across that before, it's the federal government's arts and disability strategy that came out about 12 months ago now, and it's representative disabled artists and arts workers and people from the screen and game sector from across the country. And so we're really lucky to have Elise representing Tasmania on that. But it does mean you have to go to a lot of meetings, Elise. And
exactly, it does. And having an extra person like Kelly and Rodri and for others, then yes, the more people, more support they have, the better for me.
Beautiful, beautiful. And within the work that you do, Elise, within Second Echo and the other work that you do, how do you think that we can best support artists with disability to enable them to make great work?
One thing I wanted to point out that your questions are perfect too. I don't know how to answer that question. I'm an artist. I like to help other people. I'm also on the Second Echo board as well, and they do listen to me in terms with advice. So yeah, I think the answer is yes. Second Echo is like a family to me. They help me a lot.
I love hearing that you're on the board as well, Elise, because we know that so many arts boards around Australia don't have people with disability represented on boards. So then it's really hard for leadership to make good decisions.
I was going to say, Morwenna, that is actually Kelly's idea. She wants me to be on the Second Echo board so I can help others. I can be their voice.
And that's so important, Elise, that you've got that voice at the table and that you're involved in that level of decision making. For any arts organisation, but particularly with Second Echo, so important to have artist representation on that board and also the voice of people with disability on that board as well. And
I just want to point out too that working with people with disability is my compassion. It's my compassion, it's my desire. I want to do everything I can to help them, especially different areas within employment, art industry, and the list goes on.
There's a lot of work to do, isn't there, Elise? And we know there's some really great research that's come out of places like Creative Australia. And sadly, we know that artists with disability earn 42% less than artists without disability across Australia right now. We also know we're underrepresented in terms of only 16% of professional artists feel safe to identify as people with disability. And in terms of leadership roles in the arts, it's something like 3% of arts leaders are
That
people.
many.
Well, yeah, which is not many at all, is it?
Oh my goodness, good to know that I'm here
Yeah, it's very good that you're here, Elise. Don't go anywhere. We need you.
then.
Do a lot. Yeah. So we've got lots of work to do. And I think part of what Elise is doing is is working at that leadership level to support others, and create space and create pathways for other artists with disability coming through. So thank you, Elise.
Mm-hmm.
Elise, is there anything else that you wanted to say right now, or should I
Nope.
grill
Move on.
Kelly? Yeah, okay, thank you. Kelly, you're up. So you are someone who has worked all over the world, from the US to Europe, and you've been based in Tassie for a while now, working at Second Echo for over a decade by the sounds of that. So I'm really curious to hear what you've seen evolve and change around inclusive practice over the years, and what have you learnt about how we can best create spaces where everyone feels like they belong?
Yeah, I've been trying to think about this, Morwenna, and I think when I first started thinking, about diversity and inclusion, it seems that most places, it was still in the architecture. It was about making room. It was, do we have ramps? Are we using captions? Is there a last minute kind of Auslan booking for an audience? And I couldn't quite get my head around it, but it seemed like it was all about accommodation, not about agency. And I think that's what I've started to really see and have really, been working for, is that evolution of understanding that belonging isn't a service that you offer. It's more like a relationship, that you have to build. And I think at Second Echo, that's what the methodology that we've been trying to unpack and then trying to share. And I would say that I have learned that, we have to listen first. It's kind of like what you were saying. Have you asked a question and have you listened? And by doing that, we really can create an environment where we co-create everything that we do. It's in our title, ensemble. And we let the artist lead, and we let the work that's being made change because of who's in the room. And I think for me, that's when I start to see belonging being I guess, more than a welcome mat, and it kind of becomes the actual architecture of what we are doing and how we are relating and working together. I would say, I think I've learned that if you want that a real belonging, that I've really had to surrender control, and I've witnessed that happen. And in doing that, the structures we build are more flexible, and that we can prioritize the relationships over the rules, and that I think the most important is that the differences there and the disability or the diversities, they're really it's really the engine for the creativity, not an obstacle that we have to work around. And if you think about nature, really, right, it models it perfectly. That in terms of a monoculture, it always collapses, and it's the diversity of how our ecosystems thrive. And I think the arts are no different. That when we privilege a mainstream, although I guess in a Second Echo we quite often question, is there a mainstream? But with the simplicity of the same bodies, the same stories, the same training pathways, we're just creating this kind of cultural monocrop. And our practice, this diversity, is biodiversity, and I think it's our creative survival. That we're not chasing to be like everybody else. At Second Echo, I feel like that we're growing a forest around either sides of this stream that's all going into an ocean that is diverse, and it's unruly, and it's interdependent. And I think that's the exciting part, where these new art forms emerge. And I think it's a place where I hope we all feel that we can belong. Sorry, that was kind of long. I got excited, Morwenna.
You're allowed to get excited, Kelly. We highly encourage it, in fact. And there's so much to get excited about with the work that you're doing, and where things are shifting and evolving to, I think, over time. I suppose you sort of touched on it, Kelly, but you've worked with so many different artists, and obviously you've worked with them in the second echo kind of capacity, but I'm sure you've seen some of the artists that you work with then work with others in different ways. And I wondered if you could maybe talk a little bit about some of the barriers, some of the things that can get in the way of artists with disability doing their work, and what needs to shift to kind of further remove those barriers in the Tasmanian arts sector.
Well, I think I'm probably an eternal optimist, Morwenna, and I think that most of the barriers that artists face, all artists are facing, not just disabled artists, but and I think the reality is that none of the main ones are natural. They've all been built. That almost every single barrier we can run up against, whether it be a strict kind of rigid rehearsal structures like you were talking about, or completely inaccessible training pathways, not being paid enough. They're all things that have been designed and that someone decided, someone has decided, who decided that rehearsal is done in 12 weeks or what professionalism might look like, and who decides which bodies get to be seen as serious artists. I don't think this has kind of fallen from the sky. It's something that the choices that have been made, and I think even Tassie, you see, geography adds even another layer where our venues are often inaccessible, transport, the amount of people and networks, but again, these aren't natural. They're outcomes of our planning and our resources and priorities, both of our governments as well as as us as a community. But again, I think if they're built, then they can be rebuilt, and we have solutions, and we can redesign rehearsal rooms and studios and schedules. We can program disability-led work in main seasons, not kind of as your add-on. Yeah, quick, let's tick that community box. And I think, as Elise was saying, most importantly, we can put disabled artists in leadership. They belong on our boards, on selection panels, in programming, and the system starts when it's shaped by the people most affected by it. So, we've built ramps, we can build bridges, we've built wide open doors. We are the builders. So I'd say let's just get on with it and choose what we build next.
And how we reimagine things. I really love that point about, it's all man-made and self-imposed, isn't it? All of this stuff.
Mm-hmm. I think so. I think there's a lot, again, in that optimistic way, there's a lot we can do collectively as artists and organizations and people who support storytelling and communication, that we can do it better.
Beautiful.
For everyone.
Thanks, Kelly. Lisa, let's come to you. Hello.
Hello.
You work across so many different fields, Lisa. I feel like you're a Michelangelo or something from the past, working in all these different spaces and different art forms. And I'm really curious to hear about, from that kind of broad helicopter view that you've had of the arts. What's getting in the way, do you think, with some art forms compared to others? Is there anything that you've noticed around the different areas of your practice where things might have been a little, different or the same? Because, we know that sometimes the conversation around access and inclusion is a little more ahead or a little more behind, depending on the different practice area that you work in. So tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Firstly, I'd just like to agree with everything that Elise and Kelly have said. Just absolutely confirming from my perspective, power and culture play massive impacts on these things, and it is massively intersectional. So getting back to your question about the way different art forms are doing different things, for example, somebody who lives with disability may not be able to write a novel, but they can write poetry. Novels have pathways to opportunity in terms of things like funding and publication. Poetry in Tasmania does not so much these days. It's the same with different kinds of art forms. If you're looking at sculpture in terms of it being out of brass or stone or something big and impressive, masculine, and something small and feminine like embroidery or felting, which might be much more accessible to a person with disability. The pathways to opportunities just aren't there. And it's not just because of disability stigma, it's because of the intersectionality of what's happening. And with that intersectionality, also at play are socioeconomic factors. Many people with disability are living in poverty. So when we look at the kinds of changes in opportunity for people, I remember in the 90s, every share house had a practice room, a band room. These days, because of the housing crisis, we don't have that. It's expensive to hire a space to practice, and people can't practice at home because they're scared of being kicked out. We need more practice spaces that are accessible to people generally, and that means accessible in terms of disability access specifically, but also socioeconomically, and in terms of neurodiversity and all of those different things that are accessible to trans and non-binary people. I put a little trans flag up at a quiet space that I did the day before yesterday, and someone rushed in because they saw that it was a safe space. That kind of thing makes a difference. Communication improvements, meeting people where they're at, everything that Kelly said about relationships and what you said, Elise, about family. There's a massive difference between disability rights and disability justice. So to me, disability rights means looking at accommodations that we can provide to sort of balance things a little bit more. But it also always comes from a perspective where disabled people are less than. With disability justice, we're looking at those things that you said at the beginning, where when we're working with us with disability, we're having this breadth of experience and joy and creativity, and it's enriching. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. When we look at that book, A Room of One's Own, that in order to be able to create, we need to have our basic needs met, and that means things like food and housing. So community care matters. I think we need to look at practice-based approaches rather than outcome-based approaches. So, of course, we all want any artwork that is being created to be wonderful, but if we look at what's happening in the arts at the moment, particularly with arts funding, practice-based approaches and process-based approaches are being nurtured anyway, because we can see that they make great art. So we can very easily do that with this sort of thing too. And it is, like you said, about factoring it into our budgets and changing our culture. I think in terms of culture, it's a difficult thing to think about, but one way, and this is, simplifications are never cover all bases, but I think if we were going to look at it as if we were organizing family Christmas or something like that, what do? You meet people where they're at. You make sure that everybody feels welcome. You make sure you're communicating with everybody as they need their communication to be made. You make sure that the space is such that everybody is welcome and comfortable. There are all these little things that we do. My goodness, I've written things down because I felt like this would be a safe space to demonstrate what disability access looks like. And to me, writing things down is one of those things. So, like, listening and being flexible, giving people different options for communication, be it email, video call, being in person or via phone, understanding that for many people, there also may be issues like anxiety and fatigue, which can have a very, very big impact. Brain fog is a massive thing for a lot of people. And being aware that we can, as a society, kind of judge these things and think that it could be laziness or disinterest or something like that. Often it's not. Often it's just people being fatigued. Communication improvements. I think this sort of thing is much harder when we've got bigger organizations, but including people into positions of power really helps so much.
It's so important, isn't it, Lisa, in terms of how decisions are made, and what, what influences and shapes, the direction of things. So I love that you've written things down. I'm a person that writes things down too, because there's a lot to say on this topic. And I think what's really struck me meeting you as we've prepared for this session is just how interlinked your work is with community and with caring for people, and kindness as well is a word that I always think of around you and your work. And I know you've talked about this a little bit, but this idea of kind of community care and mutual aid, just wondered if there's anything else that you wanted to add around that in terms of your practice and how you look after yourself within this, while you're also looking after others.
I think one of the ways I look after myself is by working in spaces that are safe. And I think we all do this. And there are spaces out there that are really safe and inclusive and working on doing great things. So I'm part of a group called Lutruwita Activism and Mutual Aid Collective. We're working to create a social space, which will be a physical space where people in the community can get together and do things. So that's a really exciting thing. Putting energy into that feels like energy well invested, because it'll be something that everybody can use, and it'll have good practice. The Grassroots Action Network community are also wonderful like that, hanging around with amazing people. Like my friend Roz Pearson is looking to create a jazz club, which is accessible and inclusive. Organisations like TPAN, Tasmanian Palestinian, oh my gosh, it's flying out of my head. Activism Network could be. I've just had a brain fart, excuse me. Mutual Aid Community Kitchen. Even businesses like Art Gym and Artosaurus doing really wonderful things. So when I think about community care, it's really nothing new. A lot of what we can look to for good practices is stuff that's happening already in DIY culture and has been for decades, and stuff that has been happening in families and in Indigenous communities for thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. So, gosh, what have I written down here? A culture of sharing opportunities. So we all know about gatekeeping, that happens in the arts as well as anywhere where there are limited opportunities. But sharing opportunities, I really do believe we get better outcomes. I mean, we see that modelled in business anyway, like North Hobart is a restaurant strip where people will go there because there are all the restaurants, and it benefits the restaurants to be there with one another. We can do this, we can do the same in the arts by creating hubs and networks and looking after each other. The DIY scenes include alternate methods of putting things out there, like zines are wonderful. Grassroots avenues are wonderful because they give people an opportunity to practice, an opportunity to perform and be involved. And we really would love to see steps whereby we can go from these to bigger things. The Ignite crew who do youth events in Tasmania at the moment, they are bridging this gap between DIY and general art spaces. And it's amazing hearing them speak about the difference that funding makes in being able to actually pay artists. That kind of opportunity is extremely meaningful. I like to perform at spaces where I know I'll be safe. I mean, this is so obvious. Um, I went to Melbourne and played with my band there, and we played at a place called Cafe Gummo. And I knew that it was because the politics were inclusive, that I would be safe. I knew that if I needed a glass of water, no one would shame me for not drinking alcohol. You know, all of those cultural elements, they make a really big difference to places being accessible to people. And I've also got a bit of experience with my event management stuff in really learning on the job that we have to build relationships to meet people where they're at. And that means establishing trust. And it's exactly like what you said earlier on about how sometimes we need to show up in multiple different ways and ask the question a few times before someone will be before they'll know that they're safe to respond with their needs and be able to show up and be vulnerable, because I think being creative is absolutely being vulnerable. And if we want people to do that, we have to make it safe for them. So this practice of sharing information, sharing responsibilities, I actually like the idea of not just bringing people into power structures, but getting rid of power structures, so that when you get rid of power structures, everybody gets to share the responsibilities. We share the information so that nobody can get burnt out and leave everything in a plop. Everybody shares the accountability, which is, that's great to have ownership. It's a wonderful feeling. Reduces paperwork. My gosh, there are so many benefits to sort of flat structures, and we see that it has worked through the ages in so many different communities. I feel like in modern culture, we're kind of overwhelming ourselves with little rules and paperwork, and I don't know that many people really benefit from that.
Thank you so much, Lisa. You're getting lots of love in the chat, and people are very interested in particularly some of the organisations I think that can help and support around this. So, Lisa, feel free to check what we've got in the chat and see if there's anything else you'd suggest and add it in for us. I really love what you've been saying about safety, and I think in the disability community now, we're also starting to talk more about cultural safety and what does cultural safety look like from a disability lens as well. So I think that's a really interesting conversation that we're having right now. Now I want to get to Zara because we need to hear from you. So Zara, you run this incredible small art space, and so I'm sure you are no stranger to the challenges that come with running a small arts organisation, and the fact that sometimes you can't do it all, because of the shoestring that you're often operating on. So how can we think and be honest about, what the limits might be while still finding creative ways to be inclusive?
Definitely. And thank you, everyone else, for speaking. I think what I'm about to say will possibly echo a lot, forgive the pun, will probably echo of what everyone else has been saying already. But I think really community is number one with the way we lead our organisation. And I think that's through creating genuine relationships with people and with the artists that we work with. And being vulnerable not only on a personal level, but also on an organizational level. Like being honest about your capacity. I think as arts orgs, we're all really running off a shoestring, but there are so many creative ways. And there's a lot of resources out there that are free. And Morwenna has a great collection of them. And I think when being honest about the things that we can offer and the things that we can't offer is really, I think for us, one of our biggest limitations is the physicality of the space in which we exist in. And that's often an issue that a lot of smaller arts orgs will face, I think, across the ball, and just always trying to improve our physical space where we can, but also acknowledging the limitations that are built into the physicality of it. And then there's also that element that being in the visual arts by design isn't accessible. And I think really studying visual artists who work with different visual impairments has been something really important to me. I highly recommend people looking at Faye Davies' practice, who was someone I was introduced to when I was in my early stages of being in the arts. And she's done some really fabulous work and talks about how we can become more accessible in these smaller arts organizations. But I think for me, access really starts is that I always, when working with artists, I always try to make sure I have a one-on-one meeting with them and create that personal connection with them and be honest about my own disabilities as well. And I think that's helped other people be like, okay, I have these access needs. Can we do them? And then there's also, I'm really fortunate to have an incredibly supportive board. So we have a board of volunteers who help out. And I would say at least 50% of those people are neurodiverse or disabled. So I think access comes to our conversation monthly or like very, very regularly. And we're always kind of brainstorming different ways on how to improve our access. But I think having genuine relationships with the community is what has been able to lead us to know what we can do first, because our community will tell us what they need.
Won't they just? And we're often not backwards in coming forwards sometimes, with explaining what we need sometimes when we feel safe to do so. Zara, it was really good to hear you talk about sharing your own lived experience in this too, and I think that can be really helpful and valuable when we are collaborating with others, working with artists through organisations too. How do you approach your own access needs at work, and what kind of tools and supports have helped you along your journey?
I think for me, there's a lot of things that have really helped me on my journey, especially because I wasn't able to afford my diagnosis until recently. And I think I'd love everyone to know that you don't need a piece of paper to prove your access needs. I think that's really important. You can have access needs no matter who you are. And at some stage in your life, most people will be disabled, especially as we grow older. I think for me, I found that the perfect job for my ADHD because I do play so many hats. But also being honest with the people who support me in my role, being honest with the board and saying, hey, look, I need to step back for a day or two, or just being honest with where I'm at and how I'm feeling. And I think consistently being vulnerable has been something that I have found really empowering. And it's something that I've often struggled with previously, is expressing my needs. And you'll know, like right now I'm fiddling with my, exactly. And I think for me, it's always keeping my hands and my mind busy at the same time. I'm one of those people who needs something going consistently, and I find it really hard to slow down. And being with our exhibitions is what does allow me to slow down sometimes. But also, sorry, I'm a bit rambly today. My ADHD is off the charts at the moment, so I'm really struggling to focus. I'm sorry, everyone.
No apology needed. It's been very, I think very, you covered a lot of ground, Zara. And I think you're absolutely right. Like there are so many people that have access needs, and access needs should not be tied to a medical diagnosis, particularly when we know we've got so many barriers to getting a medical diagnosis, particularly around cost as well. It's interesting. I've just been doing a bit of work with a national arts training institution, and they've got a really great process in place around study access plans and being able to have access support while you do your tertiary study. But to get a study access plan, you have to provide your medical records. And that's not right. And that's absolutely something that they're going to change. But I think, in our last training session, we talked a little bit about the social model of disability versus the medical model. And I think we still do see the medicalised way that people with disability are often treated really get in the way, actually, of providing good access to those of us that have access needs. So thank you, Zara. I want to open it to the floor, and I'd love to encourage our audience to jump in with any questions. We've got this incredible expert panel with us today, so don't miss your chance to ask them lots of juicy things. And there has been some really great dialogue and conversation going in the chat, and really hearing and noting some of the challenges in the environments that you operate, like working with local government and how challenging that can be to pay artists properly and, for advice and expertise. So, really appreciate and understand some of the challenges that we have as organisations too in doing this work. But I just want to create a little bit of space to invite our audience to come in with any questions or things that you'd like to know more about from our panel. And as people are hopefully writing away to us and doing that in the chat, maybe to you, panel, I would say, can you perhaps think of and share a time where your access needs have been met really well, and what that's looked and felt like? And maybe I'll throw back to the Second Echo crew just to see if there's any good thoughts you might have here, and then to Zara and Lisa. If there's anything that springs to mind, Second Echo.
Can you repeat that question for us, please, Morwenna, of what we're thinking about?
Can you think of a time where your access needs have been met really well and what that has meant for you as an artist?
What do you think, Elise?
Hopefully,
I can hop in if you like.
Please, Zara.
One big memory that comes to me was a few years ago, I had a panic attack at Monofoma, and the staff noticed immediately. And I was very fortunate to have a friend with me, and the staff immediately knew what I needed and took me to the quiet space and directed us there. And we found that space, and the space was like sensorially really calming. And it really is what allowed me to get through the rest of that day, I think, is because that staff member immediately saw and was on the radio making sure that people were aware of the assistance that was required, and doing it in a manner that wasn't judgmental. To be like, hey, you okay? And not saying they knew what was going on, but having that element of understanding. And that sat with me like really strongly. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing, Zara. Thank you for sharing. And I think like good customer service goes such a long way, doesn't it? When staff at events or arts activities, have training and they know what to do in those circumstances, and they know how to support in a safe way.
I would have to say that Monofoma for us too is sorely missed as a festival, and the curation that Brian Ritchie did. But I think he was one of the few festivals that came to us and said, what do you have? recognizing the professional work that we were doing and really interested in Second Echo as artists, and taking away that barrier of, oh, what have we got left? Let's fill this hole with something local. Oh, great, let's tick a second box. It's, you know, it's disability. And he just didn't even ask about that. He was not interested, really only interested in the work. And I realized it took me a second. I was like, wow, that this is new. Why is this new? You know, why is this a surprise to me that there is this huge barrier of assumption and ableism that we are hitting as artists, I think everywhere, but definitely on this island. And it was huge when that was taken away. When they then said, okay, great, what project do you have? Great, what do you need? And it was asked, 2 years in advance, acknowledging the kind of time that we need to meet our own expectation of the work that we are imagining. So it was extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary from a curatorial and a producing way of working.
Yes. R.I.P. Monofoma, we've got in the chat here, indeed. Yes. We're getting some great questions in the chat. So let's jump to our audience questions rather than my vamping, riffing questions. So from Mary, when things go wrong with arts organisations, how can an individual who might have disability, be a person of colour, queer, advocate for themselves within small communities when an arts organisation refuses to work with you to fix the problem? So maybe we'll just take that as a broad question around how do we advocate for ourselves and what can we do as individual artists to get what we need? Has anyone got any thoughts to share on that? Lisa?
I think this is really difficult, and it's difficult because of the power imbalances. I think ultimately the responsibility lies with organisations, and when organisations step up with that, that's where things will really be better. In the meantime, we do have some wonderful advocates in the community. I've actually just completely forgotten my friend's name, but I'll put it in. I'll put it in the chat. This is absolutely terrible, but this is an example of what happens. But yeah, advocates can make a big difference, and they are out there.
Thanks, Lisa. Anyone else want to contribute anything to that question around self-advocacy?
All I would say is similar to what Lisa said, at Second Echo, basically, we don't go anywhere alone. That everywhere we go is at least two people. So you have someone else to hear, someone else to take notes, just to take the time and to make sure that there is as much space for whatever conversation, especially if it's a hard one, that you can get.
Thanks.
I've got something to say about self-advocacy as well. It's all about listening to their voice and their stories and their opinion and their views.
Thank you, Elise. And that word listening again, right? And whose voice are we listening to and whose voice are we hearing?
Because I'm an advocate myself, so I know what I can do to help others. So it's all about active listening and all those other things that we be talking about today is crucial.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Elise. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a couple of questions here around education. And the first one's interesting to me. It sort of makes me reflect on this institution I've been working with recently. But the question is, from an arts educator perspective, what would you like to have in your training? And how can tertiary arts training empower and prepare people to move from education into the industry, into arts work? I might just give one little example and then throw it to you guys. But with this institution I mentioned before that had these great study access plans, one of the things they're going to do is they're going to work with their students to turn their study access plan from uni into an access rider so that they've then got an access rider to go out to the industry with when they're going out and seeking work. So I think that's one really practical thing that they're going to do to help prepare. But thoughts from the panel here around what would you like to have in training and how do we think that training providers can do better in terms of inclusive education and sort of moving people from education to then getting work?
From my perspective, I think it would be great if students didn't have to require these, like, I know it's impossible in these institutional barriers that we face, but getting those learning access plans only if you have proof has been really damaging and has, I think, meant a lot of people don't end up finishing university across the globe. And I think it would be incredible to see, for example, when you do access riders, you don't just send your access riders to disabled artists, you send your access riders to everyone. And I think it would be really empowering if those access riders were used in a tertiary education space, as well as just educating. I think I went to art school on the mainland, so I perhaps had a very different experience to what it is in Tasmania. But I think it would be great to see a focus on professional development be undertaken in art schools. I think there's a really heavy theory and creative element, but we often aren't talking about what happens when we enter these professional or grassroots organizations post-education. And I think it would be great to see students being more equipped with those skills that come from the tertiary institutions.
Thanks, Zara. I think it's a great suggestion there and some really good things to think about. And Lisa?
I think also more could be done in terms of introductions into groups. And to me, that's that there needs to be a word which is the opposite of gatekeeping. I would use it all the time. But yeah, often educational institutions can be kind of institutional, of course, and there needs to be a pathway into independent practices, and that usually happens to people when they have contacts. So giving people resources that enables them to have the contacts, the names of the people who book gigs and the contact numbers of the people who book gigs, the names of the different galleries, just very simple things like that, I think would be very, very helpful for students.
Yeah, but very practical, right? And what a great, what important things to have in your toolkit when you graduate from somewhere and looking for work. So important. There's been a bit of chat, I think, that's been perhaps resolved about some education things around year 11 and 12. So I might skip over that and just we might have time for one or two more. So there's a question here, I think, around artists with disability and art, I guess, that they're making, being taken in original directions. The person says, I mean, really at the forefront of some movements. Perhaps it is disability and the disability thinking that makes the work more diverse, more authentic, and so on. So I wonder if that's a sort of question or comment around the type of work that artists with disability are making, the type of storytelling that they're doing, and it being really original and really diverse and interesting. And please jump in, Zoom user, if I haven't quite represented your question as you intended. But any thoughts from any of you there? I certainly know that part of what attracts me to working in this field is just I think the work that is being made is really great. But any comments there around the type of work that disabled artists are making and why it's important to have on our stages and screens and walls? Lisa.
It's wider representation. It's exactly what Kelly was saying earlier about how when things are so focused and only some people are accessible, you're getting a very narrow field of art. But when you open it up to everybody, then it's broader, it's more interesting because of that diversity.
Thank you. Zara, anything to add there?
I'm not sure I have quite the words for it, but I think when artists put their disabilities forward, it becomes political. And there's something gained and something lost through that. And I'm not sure I have like an answer but there's I think there's an artist called Sam Peterson, who I'm trying to find her website at the moment, who I went to art school with, who has made some of the most powerful works I've seen, but also the most political works I've seen. And I think also the trickiness with protecting yourself at the same time as advocating for yourself. It's a really confusing gray zone sometimes. I hope that addresses.
Yeah, I feel like I'm in that same world of trying to find the words for it, Zara. I should probably try and dance it. Maybe it lives in that in between. But I think there's something I know that I'm starting to witness a little bit of the dignity of risk, of this allowing to just take the bubble wrap off a little bit and allow people to, at Second Echo we're like, okay, let's give it a red hot try. What's the worst thing that can happen? We might fail. It might be the worst dance I've done today, but we're just going for it anyway. And that is exciting. And we have a certain freedom and I'm to do it and a call to do it, to really take risks in a beautiful way. Because I mean, why not? Why wouldn't we? And I think that is when I look around is some of what that is really exciting me. The why not rocket.
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to add that it is a tricky thing, because artists with disability will bring specific things. But then there's also this sort of contradiction that often, as was being said before, artists with disability are often asked to do art about disability, which is so limiting. So when we offer for people or allow people to be their whole self, so much more comes out, and it's so much more wonderful.
It truly is, isn't it? And I'm so sorry, but we're going to have to kind of wrap up our conversation because there's a few things I want to let you know about before the end. This is the last of our 4 training sessions that we have had as part of this program, but they're all very shortly after this one, they'll all be up and available online. So if you've missed any, you can go back and have a look at those. We also have an incredible resource hub on the Arts Tasmania website with heaps of those free checklists and things to help people do this work. And the forum, we have this amazing forum called From Barriers to Belonging, an Equity in the Arts Forum, happening at the Hedberg on the 5th of February. So pop it in your diary, and there is limited tickets available. So we encourage you to register now. I'll get one of my team to pop the link to that in the chat. So get yourselves along to that. It's in person and also happening online as well. So there's a variety of different ways that you can participate, and we'll be having some incredible conversations with artists and arts workers with and without disability from across the state. So you don't want to miss it. That'll be coming up soon. There is the CAT Arts and Accessibility Network quarterly meetups that will be continuing next year. Amalia, I'll get you to pop your details in the chat about those. Also, Modality Co up in Burnie run a monthly meetup around all things to do with disability access and Tassie. So there's lots of different ways to get involved and continue the conversation from today. But I just want to say a huge thank you to our incredible panel for being part of today's conversation. This has been a real highlight of my week around all things to do with International Day for People with Disabilities. So thank you very much for being part of today's conversation. Hopefully you've put some links in the chat so that people can find you afterwards if they want to continue the conversation. And thank you, audience, for tuning in today, joining us. Some of you, I think, have been here for 4 out of 4 of our training sessions. So we're really grateful for you to have been with us for these important conversations. So lots of love, everyone. Thank you for being part of this. And we hope to see you in February, if not before. So thanks very much, and see you next time. Thanks, everyone.